Kendo can be tough work. In fact, if it's too easy, you're probably not doing it right. And it's within this setting that we can sometimes see certain coaching personas come out that are intended to motivate people, adjust behaviors, and teach certain value. On the one hand, we have the good cop persona that aims to build students up with encouragement and empathy. Then we have the bad cop, whose aim is to change behavior and attitudes through more stern and strict means, be it a verbal dressing down or a kick in the butt via kakarigeko. And as Kendo coaches, we often oscillate between these two approaches. We might be tough as nails one moment and leave students feeling like a champ with just a few words of encouragement at the end of training. And then there are those who are all bad cop all of the time. So much so you wonder if they're taking the warrior thing just a little bit too far. Now, of course, there are students who get a kick out of the hardcore discipline and see the dojo experience as the school of hard knocks. But I think that we all know that this kind of intense training isn't always everyone's cup of tea, especially nowadays. So how do we find the right balance of these personas, where standards are kept high, but the corrective actions taken aren't running the risk of pushing people away for good? Hey team, I'm Blake, and if you're new here, this channel is about helping you to be a better Kendo coach with insights from the latest research and my own experience as a coach and coach educator. If you want to learn a little bit more about Kendo coaching from me, please check out the link below because I've got a course coming that you might be really interested in. So this episode on the topic of good cop, bad cop styles of coaching comes from a question I received in the comment section recently. On the back of the idea that there's pros and cons of the good cop, bad cop personas we see in ourselves and the club senpai, the key question here is this. From a practical standpoint, how much is too much bad cop? And how much is too much good cop? Since receiving this question, I've done quite a bit of soul searching to figure out exactly where I stand on the issue. On the one hand, I definitely see value in a strict approach. I got it and it served me reasonably well. So when I started coaching, it was only natural that I replicated what I had been through, as well as what I'd heard about, especially from folklore around training in Japan. With this, rightly or wrongly, my training sometimes resembled a Cobra Kai approach, and I tended to adopt the bad cop routine a fair bit. If I'm really honest, it made me feel pretty powerful, which was pretty cool for a young guy in my mid-20s running a strong Kendo club. The fact was that the bad cop persona was really the only way I knew how to motivate people. And while we all trained hard and my approach appealed to lots of people over the years, it also led to a lot of people bowing out. The overarching problem was that I had very little balance and little appreciation for the other ways that I could influence and motivate people to reach for higher standards for themselves and for the club. In recent years, I've found a way to reconcile this, and I'm going to share that with you in just a little bit, so please stick around. So one of the more simplistic ways to look at the good cop, bad cop personas in the dojo is viewing it as the carrot and the stick approach. When it's a behavior we want to encourage, the carrot takes the form of either an internal or external reward, like verbal praise or a chocolate fish. And if it's a behavior we want to see less of, the stick aims to add punishment by way of a literal stick on the backside, although probably not advisable for most in this day and age. Given the prevalence of this approach in many coaching contexts, I think it's useful for us to understand the theory that underpins it so we can think more clearly about its currency. So we can do this by looking at operant conditioning, which is a branch of behavioral learning theory. In simple terms, this theory of learning is based on the notion that a stimuli in the environment can change a behavior. Operant conditioning suggests that the notion of positive reinforcement, or adding something into the training, can act to increase a behavior. Praising a student when they execute a technique correctly to encourage more of the same is a basic and familiar example. But we could also use negative reinforcement, which involves removing something to increase a behavior. This might mean suggesting that if a student behaves in a certain way, they won't have to do kakarigeko. Of course, this will only reinforce the desired behavior if the student sees kakarigeko as something to avoid. Essentially, we're looking to increase the behavior by either adding something in or taking something away. If this is what the learner wants, the idea is that they will change their behavior accordingly. Now, when we're bad cop or opt to use the stick instead of the carrot, we tend to use punishment in an effort to decrease a certain behavior. For example, we can use positive punishment. This is where we add something into the training to decrease a behavior, for instance by putting in extra drills or activities like kakarigeko to discourage students from behaving in certain ways. The common one I used to do, for example, was related to turning up on time. If you were late, you would do kakarigeko at the end of training. In simple terms, I was adding something in an effort to decrease an undesirable behaviour. Or using negative punishment, we could take something away from the student to decrease a behaviour we want to see less of. For instance, imagine a student who chats constantly during practice. You might ask them to sit out, therefore removing the opportunity to participate and encourage focus when they return. Although I tend to use this one sparingly at the dojo and look at other strategies first. There are, of course, multiple ways all this could play out. Now, I've suggested that the bad cop solely deals in punishment and the good cop only provides reinforcement. This isn't necessarily the case all the time, but hopefully you get the idea that these are the various ways we tend to engage with the learning process as coaches. So in other words, the good cop, bad cop personas are tools we can use to add emphasis to the messages we want to send. But I'm not sure if this is where the conversation needs to stop, especially when we consider how important social interactions and role models are in the learning process. But before we get on to that, what are your experiences with the bad cop coaching style? Let me know if you've ever had a good cop or a bad cop on your Kendo journey and how it made you feel and what the outcome was. Maybe you've got a good balance in your club, or maybe you have a particularly problematic bad cop who causes you a headache every week. Drop your stories in the comments below. As I said before, I did a little bit of soul searching for this episode, and while it took a while, I managed to make the link between the issue of the overzealous bad cop to my interest in Stoic philosophy. And here it is in the form of a quote from Marcus Aurelius that I wrote down a few years ago and regularly revisit to help me be a good dad. Be strict with yourself and tolerant with others. For me, this is an excellent way to go beyond the issue of how to find a balance with good cop, bad cop approaches. Being strict with myself, first and foremost, keeps me honest as a coach. It helps me to remember that the buck starts and stops with me. If I'm genuine in my efforts, I can reasonably expect that people will notice this and follow my lead in time. Importantly, being tolerant with others means that if and when people miss the mark, I can remain patient. Kendo is a long game and getting it right takes a lifetime. So what's the hurry? With this in mind, the need to be bad cop seems less important, and this helps me to focus on building people up rather than tearing them down. Now, you can't win them all, and there's no such thing as a perfect coaching style. Crucially, we'll always need to adapt our approach for each student. We should always be observing their reactions and adjusting accordingly. But overall, I've come to appreciate that the bad cop routine may have much less impact than it once used to. To be clear, I'm not suggesting we do away with kakari geiko and all its uses, whether it be a training tool for speed or fitness, or a low-key punishment, or part of a birthday celebration. Kendo is intentionally hard. So as a coach of a combat and contact martial art, the job requires us to balance these values, continually navigate the expectations of young people and their families, all while ensuring their physical and psychological safety. And as you know, this is no easy task these days. So how are we supposed to retain the tougher aspects of Kendo to build resilience and character, while still making sure the uninitiated don't see this as violence or bullying? Click the video on your screen and we'll get stuck into this one next. I'll see you there.